All right. Are you all ready to bring it? Creativity and communication. So I'm excited about this next panel because we get to hear from leading communicators about their creative process. Where do they go for great ideas? How do they supercharge creative teams? And what difference does creativity ultimately make in strategic communication? I'm going to introduce our moderator, Ethan McCarty, and then I'll allow everyone else to introduce themselves as it unfolds. So the panel is being moderated by Ethan, a lecturer in our program, and a member of the Strategic Communication Advisory Board. I was told this morning that Ethan opens doors. That is so true. Ethan is the founder and CEO of Integral, an award-winning employee activation agency serving leaders in communication, HR, marketing, and technology. Formerly the global head of employee and innovation communications for Bloomberg and global director of social strategy for IBM, Ethan has more than 20 years of experience leading digital communications, engagement, and marketing initiatives at scale. Ethan is also a trustee of the Institute for Public Relations. And today he's joined on stage by A.G. Bevilacqua, Craig Manassian, Terry Yu, and Jimmy Stone. And I'm going to turn it over to Ethan McCarty and the gang.
Thank you so much. Thank you, my friend. Good morning to everyone. And following that amazing keynote is a trick. I too want to point out that I am also a New Yorker, but I look at the Statue of Liberty from a different angle because I'm a Brooklyner, okay? At any rate, very excited to be here and to talk about a topic that is so important to me personally. My career has been driven by and fueled by one wonderful, creative, and inspiring person after another. I feel really honored to be in the presence of so many creative people and on a panel of people who are leading in taking creativity and bringing it to bear in strategic contexts in ways that are meaningful and, as you will learn today, at a global scale as well. So really important work, and so we're going to have a chance to learn from each other this morning. So yes, indeed, I am joined by, to my left, A.G. Bevilacqua, who's the Chief Creative Officer at M Booth, and I see some of my friends from M Booth here as well. I've had the privilege to enjoy some of the creative work of M Booth and even partner with M Booth on and off over the last few years. Fantastic creative agency. And then to her left, yeah, Wu is right. We've got a ringer in the CEO in the back of the room there. To her left is Craig Manassian, who is the Chief Content and Communications and Marketing Officer of the Clinton Foundation, also with a background in making TV happen. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. So no big deal, Clinton Global Initiative. You know, maybe some of you have heard of it, small organization, really kind of a startup. And then speaking of little tiny startups, to Craig's left, we have Terry Yu, who is the Vice President of Brand and Content Strategy for IBM. A challenger brand, I think we call that, right? And also a former colleague of mine, somebody from whom I learned a lot as we work together on strategic initiatives, creative initiatives, things like producing IBM's annual report to shareholders. And to her left, Jimmy Stone from another itty-bitty company called Meta, the Vice President and Global Head of their creative shop, and also Brooklyn Dad. Yeah, okay. So we've got like the Brooklyn Dad contingent is showing up strong today. So I want to just get right into it. But first I'm going to say we're going to have some questions about like sort of foundational approaches around creativity and strategy. We're going to have some questions and some dialogue around the dynamic context of creativity. So how creativity is fluid and changing and has to be adaptive and adapting. And then we'll talk about collaboration and the ownership of creativity. Who owns it? Why, like not just the IP, but maybe also the IP, but the process and how do we get that done within organizations and in teams and so on. That sounds like a lot, but we're going to really try to preserve a good chunk of time. So for questions and answers and discussion and to hear your ideas. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a question for the panel, but if you are sparked, I have like 37 things running through my mind from the the keynote that I wish I could have shouted out, but that would have been incredibly rude. We're going to create the context for you to shout out some cool ideas without feeling like it would be rude. And then we'll end with a little speed round question. So my first question is for you, Terry. Would love to just open up with, when you think about creativity at IBM, and IBM is a very large organization, complex product set, solving some incredibly difficult and dynamic problems with the application of AI, quantum computing. How do you be creative in that context and also create things that are accessible?
Yeah, well, creativity is really important, but getting to the right idea, which the keynote speaker talked about a lot, is the most important thing to get to great creativity. You can't have great creative without great strategy. And so that's what we focus on a lot. And in the industry that I'm in, which Jimmy's in also, it's a very competitive environment. You're sort of fighting to get attention. A lot of the things that we talk about are quite complex, especially for IBM because we're primarily a B2B company. So a lot of our software and our products are things like quantum computing or hybrid cloud, generative AI. And so those aren't easy to get. And so how do you create content that really cuts through, that gets to your target audiences, that really they can grasp and understand quickly? So that's kind of why we focus so much on creativity.
Yeah, and your team of strategists really has a global remit. You're working with creatives that are all around, have to have sensitivities to different culture, linguistic, even political dispositions. Say a little bit about how you translate from strategy, that strategic team, to creatives, to who are actually going to make materials that are going to be seen potentially by millions and millions.
Well, for we're a really big company, and that means a lot of people. And so something we talk about a lot is prioritization and focus. If we all talk at the same time, try to execute creative at the same time, it's very noisy. And so it's too noisy. Think of an orchestra that's all playing different music. That doesn't work. And so a lot of what we need to do is be really, really clear on what is most important for us to get through to whom, and then let's play the same music together. And so we talk a lot about what's our focus, what are we not going to do? Let's really think about that, and that helps us really cut through in our creative, and it helps the creative team not go crazy. Because they're not asked to do 50 million things. They're asked to do a few things really, really well.
Yeah. I remember one of the things that was really core when we worked together was thinking of strategy as it's as much as what you choose not to do as what you choose to do. And I really hear you still holding true to that kind of insight. Craig, when we were talking prior to the panel, or in our panel prep, we were talking, one of the things that you brought up was applying, creativity strategically, not just to the actual content, storytelling, messaging, but also to the methods and mechanisms of distribution. Where do you, how do you apply strategic creativity to making some of those choices about how you're actually going to get a message out there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having us, and it's an honor to be up here with this group and be able to talk about what we do with the Clinton Global Initiative. Obviously, we're a nonprofit, So like most nonprofits, we don't have huge budgets for advertising, and so that's really where creativity comes in, both in terms of making the content and how we distribute it. And I can say we have looked at AG's clients, we work with IBM quite a bit, and Terry's work and Jimmy's work, and we're always trying to get inspiration from, I'll call it inspiration, they may say you're taking our idea, but I'll call it inspiration from the great work that they do and see, what worked there and how can we apply it. And a big theme, in fact, the theme of the Clinton Global Initiative is what's working. And if you're not familiar with CGI, the idea was President Clinton would go to thought leader conferences and he would hear all these great ideas and they were kind of left on the table. There would be a panel and they'd say, here's something we could do about climate change, and then go off back to their day jobs and their lives. So he decided to create one where there was an action component, literally turn ideas into action. So when we think about our job, it's to, one is to drive action, and to go back to something Terry said, the strategy, the why informs creative, and then we also then ask ourselves the question, the how question we call it, how are you actually gonna do it? And that is a theme of our philanthropic work. The whole point is to say, okay, you've identified a challenge, you've identified a solution, how are you gonna do it? A lot of times that's through partnership. How that influences distribution is to say, okay, we don't have these huge budgets, we still have a need to get our message out. What are the ways that we could do it that also amplify and accentuate the positives of our work? So partnerships. So by doing media partnerships, by doing distribution partnerships, it's a nice brand association. It gives us reach. It gives our partners content. And it's responsible because we don't have a lot of budget to do it. So that's just one example. But I think for us, we always have to think about how the message is also going to be seen, not just created.
Yeah, and we'll have to find a way to share the speaker's notes or something, but you shared with me an article that you wrote in December last year, just a month ago, looking at the sort of retreat for many news organizations from having a philanthropy beat, despite the fact that philanthropies, nonprofits, it really punch above their weight in terms of the number of people who are employed by them, not to say anything of the people who are beneficiaries of. And so that seems like that would probably be, because that earned component of media is in sort of retreat or decline, it's probably forcing some scrappiness and maybe some creativity. What's the bearing on your sort of distribution strategy that has, that change in the media landscape?
Yeah, well, it's an impact on the entire sector. And so if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, about 10% of the US workforce is employed in the nonprofit sector, which is surprising to people, I think, because people don't think of it as a sector. They're very connected to their community organizations. That could be the PTA, it could be the volunteer fire department, all the way up to the Gates Foundation, what people commonly think of as big philanthropy, but it's all part of one ecosystem. So you would say if there was any sector in the US that had 10% of the workforce employed with it, that would be something that the media really focused on. Instead, what they found is nonprofit beats are not profitable, and that runs into direct conflict with the economic pressure on the media business. So those beats don't exist, which means a lot of potentially good ideas, a lot of the way and the organizations and the people that are actually bringing people together, which in a time of polarization is important, are not being covered. So then it puts more pressure on us as organizations to say, okay, absent that channel, what do we have? How do we get it out? How does it resonate? I know storytelling can feel like an overused phrase, but it is true.
Yeah.
And you referenced my background in TV at HBO. One of the things my team, some of whom here, so sick of me saying, is applying some of those principles about what makes great TV. In our mind, it's characters, it's conflict, it's high stakes that people understand, and a ticking clock. And you say, well, what does that have to do with a nonprofit? You say, well, who among your partners, who among your people are great characters? What are they fighting? it doesn't have to be, a Marvel movie, but fighting climate change is pretty dramatic. And if you tell that story, and then obviously there are stakes, and if you put a ticking clock to it where people understand why they have to care right now, if you start there, doesn't matter what kind of organization you have, you can find a narrative success that then, resonates with people. And the final thing I'll say, and I think this is true of almost of all the work of everybody up here, there's a bigger desire for people to learn something. It's something you see with respect to podcasts, documentaries. And so we've looked at what we do and say, it's not promoting our work, it's promoting an idea that people can learn from.
Yeah.
So if we put it through that frame, then it sort of guides what we do.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I remember there's a song, I almost said famous song, but I don't think it is, by an artist named Laurie Anderson, called Language is a Virus. And I always think of that when I think about storytelling and the idea of things going viral. I think that song came out in like 1983 or something like that, but that sort of rattles around and lives rent-free in my brain. And anyway, so that trend of declining strength of certain segments of the media is driving a lot of new behaviors. It's not the only trend, and being able to identify trends is so powerful in terms of creative inputs. And last year I was in an award ceremony for an industry award ceremony, and it was like one beautiful, hilarious, touching, incredibly just vivid example of wonderful creative, and it was M. Booth. So AJ, sorry to embarrass you, but I was struck by how just precisely the creative coming out of M. Booth is attached to trends that seemed relevant and resonant. What's the connection between your creative team and being able to strategically identify some of those trends to make great creative?
Yeah, thrilled to be here. Am I on?
Yes.
Seeing some familiar faces in the audience is awesome. So yeah, what a great discussion, and thanks for the question. So a lot of the work that we do at M Booth, if I had to simplify it, is about unpacking culture. And first part of my career, I was always thinking about how do we bring the outside in? How do we help the clients better understand how to navigate in this world? And I think the other piece of the equation now is also how do we bring the inside out from the organization, and how do we help them actually find their lane in their role in culture? We just did some cool research this past summer, and we shared with the industry a white paper called Cultured, and there were some really interesting insights. For me, there was one that was 74% of consumers expect brands to be connected to culture at all times. Mm-hmm. And in a polarized society where people are trending toward the extremes versus trending toward the middle right now, it's a tricky horse to ride, right? Because culture is never one thing. It's a system of ideas that live together. So just being in culture isn't so simple all the time. Yeah. And so I think at M Booth, our overall philosophy in and outside of the creative team is to be students of culture, and to have a real diversity of people that understand the different areas and the crazy corners of culture. And we do encourage folks also to get outside of that echo chamber, that we may be in as a bunch of, liberal New Yorkers mostly, and to read things, follow people that may not have a perfect alignment to your point of views, because if you're not, you're really kind of missing a big piece of the cultural discussion. So I think the common thread for our creative is really to start with culture and kind of, thinking about the different trends, the different movements that are kind of impacting a client's business, and then from that, with the business challenge, helping them figure out, where do I belong? Am I a brand that just wants to go have fun at the Super Bowl? Am I here just to kind of relate to culture and have fun and be in people's feeds? Or am I actually here to innovate culture? Am I here to catalyze a new movement, a new discussion? Can I be a culture shaper? Can I actually help to normalize things? Can I help to, shape norms and values of society that may be adjacent to my category? Or am I actually culturally impactful? Am I a company or a brand that can actually offer something of intrinsic value to society, whether that is or is not of sometimes a commercial benefit, right? Because there's also, I think, there's room and a lens for altruism also in our business. So really understanding the different strategic paths toward that cultural connection is really at the heart of our creative approach.
I love that, and I find it so powerful. You know, AG, one of the things that was going through my mind as you were answering that is there's so much pressure right now in the United States on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and it's you know, it is a dimension the diversity in particular dimension that you led your answer with. Like, are we going to be able to have a team who are polycultural in their disposition, cosmopolitan, and therefore by definition couldn't be uniform? When you're building teams, how do you think about that? You know, the sort of representation of these different identities in order to produce something that is accessible or broadly accessible. Like,
yeah. I'll comment quickly to get others' points of view as well, but it's essential. Diversity is by absolutely the special sauce of creative at M Booth.
Yeah.
And sometimes we talk about it of needing intersectional lenses for every challenge, right? So sometimes it may be through a generational, sometimes it might be through race, sometimes it might be through gender or gender identity. But because back to that idea that culture is never one thing, we want it to be because it would be so much easier, right?
Sure.
But job security, because it's not, right? It takes a lot of studying and understanding, but it also takes a lot of collaboration.
Yeah.
People that are sitting in different parts of our culture, people with different life experiences that can say, wow, that idea slaps, or absolutely not, that's tone deaf right now. And we really do have a plurality of voices at the creative table, which I think is really essential for the world we're living in.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you know, one of the things that seems to be, I mean, it's certainly in the course I teach on employee experience and activism and activation, the principles of creating these sort of very unique, almost audience of one experiences is emergent in the workspace. You know, it is arrived in the, you know, in consumer spaces where you assume that a vendor like, you know, an Amazon or what have you knows much about your preferences and your ability to buy things or want things or deliver things when you show up at their door. And it's starting to arrive as well in the workplace. You know, employers have a lot of data about you. You'd think they would use that to your benefit in some way. But what's happening is that being able to create those experiences at scale is fundamental. You cannot have a one-to-one relationship of marketers to customers. You know, at some point you're going to have to use some technology. There's going to be heaps of data that's going to, you know, be available to you. And so to you, Jimmy, at Meta, I mean, you're sitting on, you know, data representing billions of users, and you have a creative team that I'm going to guess is not one-to-one with the 2 billion people on the platforms. How do you think about creativity at scale and being able to strategically yoke all of that information about people to creating something really special and creative?
In 2 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, first of all, thank you, Jesse, for inviting me here. I was thinking this morning about I've been in all C-level conversations in Cannes and CES panels, and I talk to the industry very, very clear, directed to their eyes, but I don't feel this intimidated that I am here. And the reason for this is that, you know, it's like this aspiration that you have here, the purity of knowledge and the environment that you have here, you know, turning the light inward and study the thing completely. Wow, I missed this. So I just wanted to also say that Sheena keynote basically is everything. That's it. I mean, I wish I could. I wish that you could. That you listen to that with your mind and your heart and your entire body, because she basically coned the entirety of what creativity is and what it will be, and as we move forward. But back to the question. So for us in Meta, obviously, is not any longer. It's not a media company of separate media outlets. It's an interconnected ecosystem of canvases where we all go. 3.5 3 billion people come to this platform every single day. And it's an interconnected ecosystem of canvases where culture is happening. It's alive. People go there to connect with each other, to connect with brands, to connect with their passions, to share about their passions. So that vibrancy of the ocean of culture is key. And I love what Adriana said for that. That's the first thing. So in the amount of content that is being created, the attention is all there. So the amount of content that is being created, consumed, and shared is rapidly accelerating. 4.5 billion reels are shared every single day. In fact, there was 3.5 billion reels 3 months ago when I was talking about this. That was 40,000 reels a second. Now it moved to 4.5 billion reels are shared every single day. And the amount of sophistication at the same time that discovery engine AI is connecting that content to the right person at the right time is also rapidly accelerating. 50% of the Instagram recommendation now is based on AI. So that's the environment that you're jumping in terms of starting. So what we are, with data, what we do is to investigate what are the elements, the principles for campaigns and brands to operate in such a complex environment. And the 3 principles that we arrive is, the first one is that you have to originate from culture, back what Adriana said. You have to originate from culture out, not from above the line in. Just originate with a language, the grammar of the platform in itself. The second one is to release the grip of your brand and collaborate with culture. With the use of your community and working with your community and creators as part of that. And the third that is becoming critically more important fast is you have to produce at the speed of culture. Again, the systems of ideas. Creative is the new targeting. You don't target anymore. You put creative in the machine, multiple, diverse creative. Therefore, the importance of diverse points of view into the machine. The machine is capable of connecting that audience to the right content at the right time. Creative is the new targeting. So in order to produce this amount of volume of content that is necessary for your brand, the brand has to have an organizing principle that we used to call the big idea. But it's moving from that big idea with matching executions to a systems of ideas, multiple ideas working together. So you have to create for people with the storytelling to connect to the heart of people and algorithms in order for that to really move throughout. So that balance is what we work to study and to work with all our clients, from the big ones to the mom and pops.
Yeah. As we were listening to the keynote, my phone was blowing up because I have several colleagues from Integral and from the faculty here. I was like, oh my God, this is so great. We need to use this. And you leaned over and you're like, oh yeah, we do this with my team.
Yeah.
So can you say a little bit about, you're,
Yeah.
and she didn't plant you in the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
so say a little bit about your use of that methodology, if you don't mind.
So basically what happens is, in this complex ecosystem that we talked about and the importance of creating at the speed of culture, obviously, how do you produce that volume of content? It's almost like conversational marketing. It's not about precious, and then you deploy that to the eye of the people. It's a conversation constantly. How do you produce that? With quality, time, and cost. AI. Gen AI is coming to accelerate our ability to create at the speed of culture. And what they did there was using AI to exactly what it is. The problem statement, which she said it very well, it's a human element. Creative will be automated. Creativity never will be, because it's the curiosity of humans to connect the dots to prompt the problem that is very a human, curious, empathy element in the equation. So I am of the belief that humanity in the loop is the most important thing, as one of my biggest jobs in Meta. But what they do is, then you use Gen AI to take that problem, and then it creates this grid that I'm going to study tremendously. But then you start like what we calling prompt whispering. Or in some cases, what they're doing is prompt stacking and using AI to accelerate the problem of breaking the elephant in many pieces. And only when you do that, you're capable of using your human creativity to connect them back again. And so what we do with that is we use Gen AI, multimodality of Gen AI to study the vast advertising elements, and then we're now able to know that one ad that is 9:16 and performs better than none, but we are now getting into what is inside the ad. There's a cup of coffee, but we're now getting into the point that if the ad was humor or not humor. And then you are able to get the insights with AI that you never had before at scale. And then you're able to then map motivators. And with motivators, you use what they're doing. Then you take those motivators and you prompt stack, and you use Gen AI to understand the multiplicity of systems of ideas. And then eventually you use AI to create the content outwardly so you can produce that systems of ideas, maximizing the discovery engine and the algorithm.
I see why, and I see why you have to use conceptual frameworks like a grammar to even be able to manage to be able to manage a system like that. That's not a process; it's a system. One of the things I was struck by as well was there's the famous designers Charles and Ray Eames, and we used to have at the IBM Design Lab these Eamesian sort of aphorisms, and one of them was, and I may not have this perfect, but something like the solution is a model of the problem, and the necessity of asking that question right. And Terry, you're my local expert on, or at least a fellow fan of Charles and Ray Eames. I wonder what you think about that, like necessity of problem modeling as part of a creative or strategic input.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think Charles Eames also used to say something about constraints being
Yeah.
a big part.
Yeah.
And constraints are your friends in creativity. If it's too wide open, you're kind of going all over the place. And so limits like constrained budget, constraints on what mediums you can use, help you to focus your creativity, and you end up finding an idea that you might not have normally if it were just a wide open field, or you've had $20 million to execute something. It might not be the best. So I think a lot about constraints. Don't feel limited by what you have to work with. Use it as a way to power your creativity.
And look at what just happened with DeepSeek, having a variety of constraints and then suddenly being able to leapfrog. It's like that necessity is the mother of invention. One of the things that indicates is the need for a tremendous amount of dynamism and agility, and that's something that we spoke about, AG, earlier was, okay, so how do you balance that need to have a long-term vision and also to be, if not reactive, at least responsive to what's happening in the marketplace of ideas and emotions in society? How do you think about that?
Yeah. I started in this industry about 22 years ago, and then of course we were planning in 2024 for 2025. We were planning 12-month, 18-month cycles, and now we're really quarter to quarter planning for clients, and even month to month, week by week, and day to day. I'll tell you a small story, which is that we had a campaign ready to go in January that was weather related, for example, for a big client, and we decided to completely redirect it in light of course, the fires in California, the wildfires. So we are not in a world where we can be planning 18 and 12 months out. So agility and being in a space of constant listening and kind of understanding the context of what's happening around us is just mission critical. Think about how much our world and our society has how much shift we're kind of experiencing with even the last 30 days or so, right? So what maybe made sense to say 90 days ago might not make sense to say today. So having creatives, working with creators and having kind of that co-creation piece happen as well is really critical. And I know you had asked me about what does the really raw application of that look like? And it is really having a strategic map, and we even go as far as creating strategy playbooks for our clients that get very directive in terms of if this type of thing happens, what would our brand say? If this type of thing happens, then maybe we don't say anything. But really, there's a lot of spider charts, but really having, seriously, a lot of strategic discussion about what is the role of this brand, where are we playing, and doing a lot of scenario. And then, to your point, Jimmy, being ready with that agile creativity and being able to create quickly, but also carefully, in this environment. But certainly the planning, which used to be annual plans, are really now almost week by week, month by month. And I think specifically in the climate that we're in right now, which is so heightened for so many reasons, again, back to understanding the landscape and also having the multiple lenses on different creative challenges too, so we can sort of make the decision together, like we need to pivot right now, here's the recommendation that we need to bring forward. But it is the idea of sort of docile creative that sits there and it's like, okay, this is going out next week. There just needs to be so much more constant thinking and strategy sort of surrounding the creative ideas we put into the world, and responsibility.
Craig, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, you work in a space in politics and society that often has emergent and urgent issues driving the agenda and attention span of your audiences. How are you responsive, reactive, agile, without losing some of the things that make creativity beautiful and disarming and accessible?
Yeah. I think curiosity, as everyone has talked about, is the first key. Having an open mind and listening. Something AG said really resonated about something that you put as a plan 90 days ago isn't relevant today. We just had a situation where something we wrote a week ago wasn't relevant, and we had to change it. So I also think I think all of us up here, our organizations and clients are leaders in their sectors, and that has a particular responsibility too, because people look to you for whether it's how you're doing economically, but certainly how you're doing creatively, and what the brand says about what's happening in the world, or not about what's happening in the world, depending on the brand. So keeping that in mind for us, and because we depend on serving organizations all over the world that come together at the Clinton Global Initiative to work together, we really have to carefully listen to them, understand what they're going through. And sometimes, from a creativity standpoint, something that seems, you're always trying to strike that balance between, and tone. Creatively exciting and engaging versus, I hate to use the word safe, but, appropriate.
You don't want it to be exploitative either.
No.
Yeah.
And something that might seem culturally right here. Well, we have an audience in all over, Africa and, Asia, South America. So is it culturally right there? I mean, you can't, and to, I think, Jimmy's point about segmenting, sometimes you have to keep all these things in mind, and there are different audiences for different things, but they all have to work together. So it's a real challenge, but it comes from being curious and asking yourself, well, how would this land? What are your audience thinking about? What are our stakeholders and the organizations we sort of think about? This week there's different things on their mind. Some of them are facing real existential threats, which is not a political comment, just as it is what's happening.
Yeah.
The environment, or what we saw in LA with natural disaster. So you have to keep all that in mind. I did want to say something quickly about diversity too, because I think what AG was saying is absolutely right, and how President Clinton talks about it. And keeping in mind, when he was president, he had put together the most diverse cabinet at the time, was that he says, I've made hundreds of thousands of decisions in my life in all different ways. I've always found that having a diverse group of people at the table has helped me make a better decision.
Yeah.
So you can, whatever your view is, there is a real benefit to outcomes from having a diverse set of voices in the room.
Thank you for that. Jimmy, you draw a distinction between the creative and creativity, and particularly in an age of algorithmic discovery and generation. Can you share a little bit of your thinking about that distinction?
Yes. So I was talking to my son that just is a freshman in international affairs in Washington. And he's like, Dad, you have been talking about 3 years about AI is coming, do everything with AI. I'm nervous, I don't know what to do. And I said, look, just focus on what AI will never do, which is falling in love with the problem, having the empathy to know what the problem really is. Because so what about AGI and superintelligence? Well, okay. I think that my feeling was like, well, the amount of energy that AGI will need requires for to actually arrive into the empathy of the human brain will be kind of universal, not only in the planets. It's like, okay, well, that gives me 10 years of hope. But what I will say to him is that intelligence in some time is becoming a little commoditized. And might be, in Colombia, it might be a very, an interesting
Jimmy
talk.
wishes to strike that from the record.
The emotional intelligence, that's it. So learning how to feel, how to think is more important than anything else right now. Learning how to tell the story, to put words into the vision, to understand and empathize with the problem and be able to articulate it with prompt whispering the vision into the future. So that's what we mean in terms of the blood and the veins. The veins is the connections and the output might be automated. But the content that flows through that output never will be, because it changes, it moves. And so that's what we mean with the importance of this human empathy and creativity. And so how fortunate you are to be in an organization of this level, but being in the, just to train your mind to feel and to understand, and train your words to tell stories. And somebody said here today that words are what tells stories. Stories is what makes culture. Culture is what makes history. So now we are in a technology that moves, that has taken those words. So now what do we do with that? So it's all about stories, and that is what will eventually be. So whoever is the best storytellers will take that. So that's a bit the distance between the outputs, the burden of tasks of creating and building the units will be automated in the next 13 hours. But the creativity that flows through it never will be. So we're very, very optimistic about that.
I find it always so interesting when you have there's a desire when we work, particularly in large organizations, any group over 150, 200 people, you have to start to institutionalize things like creativity and innovation, and those can be sort of cultural artifacts, and those can be commonly held values, and yet that institutionalization can ultimately make people feel like they're not part of it. So, we're going to have the innovation hub. Okay, well, anyone who's working outside of the hub is not innovative. Or we're going to have the creative team. Okay, so everybody who's not on the creative team is no longer creative. Terry, working at an organization as large as IBM, and having been in brand and creative areas, how do you think about ownership of something as elusive as creativity?
I don't think anyone owns creativity. I think great ideas can come from anywhere. I know there's a great debate about comms versus marketing. I don't think of it that way. I think about who everyone cares about, who you take care of in terms of audiences. Marketing cares a lot about clients and prospects or customers, right? Comms cares about everybody else, and that's a lot. Employees, investors, the community, And so how do you bring those perspectives together to generate the right outcome for your institution or your business? That's what it's all about. And then as long as you're all committed to that same outcome, great ideas can come from anywhere. Yeah. So no one really owns creativity only. I think it's let's work together to get to the right outcome.
I think at some point the world needs a rewrite of Romeo and Juliet, where it's the comms is the Capulets and marketing is the Montagues, and somehow they just fall in love. But let's leave the death at the end to some other version. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we're all concerned about the overall reputation of an organization, how it forms relationship. And maybe for dividing up departmental budgets, those differences make a good choice. But otherwise, it's hard to say. How do you, AG? How do you deal with resistance to creativity? It's okay, we've got this a big idea or a set of big ideas, and the word safe came up earlier. How, you may have a client that says, "Wow, that is amazing," but no.
I never hear no. Of course we hear no. I mean, I don't think coming up with ideas is hard. I don't. I think it is selling in ideas and commercializing ideas and getting them into the marketplace. If you saw the beautiful brainstorm graveyards of M. Booth, you'd think that could serve us, right, for the next 3 years. But it really is all about the strategic underpinning and getting clients to really buy into it. Again, in a world where you may think the answer is to play it safe, but back to a little bit of the cultured research also that we did at M. Booth, we sort of found that in the world we're living in, if there's 3 options, it's sort of like lean in and do the thing, don't do anything, or like the third option is do something like in the middle, vanilla, that doesn't stand for anything. The best option is actually to go for it or to not.
Wow.
It's sort of in that middle area where you start to see people on both sides pull it apart.
Yeah.
So, of course, you need organizational alignment, you need stakeholder alignment, but I think you will this year see an opportunity for marketing and ideas to be bold and think about, there's a lot of holes in the world right now, I'll leave it there, and I think that we have an incredibly creative business that we get to be in, whether you're a creative or just a creative thinker, and I think that marketing can find the gaps and in some places be some of the caulk, that we may need in some spaces. So I think we'll see, Super Bowl's around the corner. I think we'll see brands kind of playing a bit in some of those spaces. Some will go safe and just do the consensus building stuff. But there is opportunity for like a little bit of risk and a little bit of edge, because in a world where we're all sometimes even trying to escape our algorithms because we are so just bombarded with content, you still need to stand out, right? You still need to, I still ask the team whenever, whether it's something big or small, why does the world need this? And you're just bringing like that common sense human lens to it. Like, tell me in one sentence, how can I tell my mom why she needs to look at this? Like, what is just that strategic and human underpinning? And I think there's so much room for that in the world that we're in. On the marketing comms thing as well, for us, it also used to feel like marketing came up with the thing, and then comms like amplified or pushed the thing into the world. But in the 2 decades I've worked, I think social media has changed that dynamic so much because now media can talk back to us. It says all sorts of interesting things every day. Creators have been born, right? We need community managers for all the channels and for our presence across the web. And because the comms people really have traditionally held those relationships, so they are mission critical in creating the thing now. It's not just yes, we will push this out. It is actually here is the landscape, and actually what would work in this landscape is maybe something entirely different because they have that more holistic, often understanding of the stakeholders. So, I would say most organizations are truly integrated with the marketing comms thing, or even have fused, the disciplines together, and it's really difficult to pull apart.
Yeah, AG, there's a recent-ish, it came out last year, thought leadership piece from the Page Society on the sort of chief communications officer's elevation to public affairs or CCO plus, and very often it's this new role kind of emerging where all those functions of marketing, communications, very often philanthropy, government affairs, are kind of rolling up because the distinction between them is no longer really meaningful other than sort of hiring people into roles. Yeah, Jimmy.
No, I just want to say that that's the key, what we're going to see in the next 2 or 3 years. It's not so much about understanding how AI is going to affect all the things that we're talking about. It's our organizational change internally. is our ability of organizations to de-silo, to work together.
De-silo.
To move from an organization to an organism.
Yeah.
And that mentality of an organism, to have neuroplasticity in order, in both individually but organizationally, is going to be the challenge. Not so much about like, oh, AI is coming, it's going to revolutionize everything. Everybody already knows that.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of how to organize your structure in order to accept it.
And for anyone who's thinking about which electives to sign up for this summer, sign up for my class. I'll tell you all about the constitutive theory of communications and the bearing it has on organizational composition. Do we have mics that can run around, or do I leap off the stage with this one? That's just like hopefully a motivator for you to come up with a question, because if it turns out that I need to leap off the stage with the mic, I will do it. There is a question. Is there a mic, or am I leaping? Looks like oh no, there's a mic. Sorry, well, I got the question anyway. In a purple sweater on the other side where you can't see her, Ed, unless you teleport through. Oh, there's another mic there. Okay, great, please introduce yourself and please go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rachel Christmas Derrick, and I lead a team of external communications folks at a financial services organization. I too believe in the power of storytelling, but like the freshman in DC, I'm worried about AI, because what I'm worried about is all of the potential misinformation and outright lies that can be woven into beautifully crafted, creative stories. And sadly, I think part of the reason we're in the shape that we are now in the country and the world is because of well-crafted stories, in part, that are pushed and moved along by AI. And I just wonder, I mean, I hear what you're saying about empathy and, you know, and feeling and all that kind of stuff, but how do we do battle against, you know, stories that are just not true, but that make people feel and do things?
Yeah.
Is that for me?
Yeah, for you or for anybody else?
Oh, it's for you,
or
Jimmy.
Anybody else?
You take that one, Jimmy.
It definitely isn't for me, so go for it, buddy.
Thank you, thank you. And that is a true. Stories that are not true have been told forever. Yeah. Stories makes history, and we know that stories are powerful. AI is going to accelerate our ability to tell them, our ability to disseminate them. I believe that polarization is not, it's happening, and sometimes the algorithm can accelerate them, but it's not creating it, in my belief. So what I think we need to do as a society is to train better, to add the correct stories to the training, to make sure that we educate better the people to be capable of understanding what is true, to investigate the sources, to see. And we, of course, we have to start to figure it out, our policies and our abilities to actually know this is created by AI. This is, you know, so it is the most complex challenge, the question that you have, yeah. And one that I will dedicate every ounce of my time to figure out that we push it.
Yeah. I also think about AI, you're 100% right. There's like a real duality to it. In a way, it's like broadening our toolbox, right, as marketing communication professionals. But it's also creating much deeper water and more consequence, right, like under everything that we're doing. And I do believe that in our world, it shouldn't be 1,000% thought of through the lens of always just making money. We're creating culture as we're creating marketing stories, ideas, and we're populating people's feeds. So I think that there also needs to be a bit of an ethical lens, right? That, and I know it's easier said than done, but that everybody has a responsibility to in the industry. And I think it's important that the next generation that's coming into the workforce with all of these tools at their disposal kind of understand the gravity of that. And I do think folks that have been in this business, there is a responsibility to kind of help teach and kind of impart that on them on a just sort of one-on-one basis, as well as some systemic things we can do together. But yeah, I mean, it's something on our mind all the time that we're talking about. And I think also just polling around consumer attitudes towards AI isn't great and creative yet. So I think we're seeing consumers use it in search, but there is still a negative feeling about some photography and video created with AI. So there's obviously necessary disclosures, et cetera, that need to happen so people understand I'm looking at something generated by AI as well. So just other things to think about.
So important.
I
Thank
think,
you for
Ethan,
that.
just
Yeah,
quickly,
please.
I think one of the things Jimmy's getting at too is how can people use the platform in a way that connects people to each other's stories better? It's something we think about a lot because, in something, President Clinton talks about, is if you get to know somebody else's story and you get to know them, then you have a common ground to work from. But also when you hear these stories that are, not true, you, as the listener, then have some basis to evaluate it that's different. If you say, that doesn't sound like the people I know, and there is a real power in the platforms to be able to use it that way. Hopefully AI will help us use it that way. But there's, we don't think, there is an individual responsibility to lean in and say, let me use those platforms in a positive way as well. You just don't have to leave it to everybody else to do.
Yeah. Thank you for that point of view. And, with the introduction of every new technology, whether it's AI or, the novella, there's the risk of it being isolating. Like, oh, you're just going to spend all your time with your nose in a book. You'll never have relationships. I mean, that was the critique of novels, right? And yeah, that didn't happen. And in fact, novels have connected us and literature and so on. And so I really, I have great optimism and fear, as you mentioned as well, Jimmy. Terry, it seems like, yeah.
Well, I feel like it's really important. We're still in the early days of AI, and I think it's really important to get comfortable and get AI literate. And so you can tell when something seems off, right? That you're comfortable with it. I sent a friend a video on Instagram. Oh no, she sent me a video of, she saw a pot of ice cream that turned into puppies. And she's like, oh, I thought it was ice cream. And I said, no, that's AI. And she's like, what? And I'm like, you need to really start looking at stuff, because you're going to get fooled a lot. And then I encourage you all to try it, explore it, get comfortable with it, see where it takes you, and let's just keep traveling down that road together.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that we've done inside of IBM too, is we have our own AI technology tools, we call it Watson X, and so we have a Watson X challenge inside the company, and our CEO said, I want you all to go come up with ideas. We're give you parameters, and I want you to try it. You could be a marketer, you could be a lawyer, you don't have to be a developer, but I want you to get to know it, to get comfortable with it, and then help us make it better, help us tell us what's wrong with it. But that's what we all have to do. So please, go try it out, see what it's like, don't be afraid of it, and let's all travel down that road together.
But
We
also,
have another-
I'm
we have another
sorry,
question.
I was
Yeah,
just gonna
please.
say quickly, don't advocate responsibility to it. We just saw a circumstance where a nonprofit that I won't name, wasn't us, but it was another one, put out an email this week that the first line was Happy 2025, which seemed like the wrong way to lead in this moment. And it was created by AI, but what it looked like was, which is great. It made the content, it was beautiful, but it didn't seem like anyone had then taken one more step to review it and say, to your point, there are just things about empathy and creativity and that, at least in this case, AI wasn't up to yet.
We have a question on this side, and I will just for the record say I draw the line at Chunky Monkey. Go ahead, and then over to you after this question. Thank you. Don't hear you yet.
Hi, my name is Flo Ngala. I'm a photographer and
Yep,
here we
working
go.
now.
I'm a photographer and potential applicant for the SPS school for the fall. Thank you so much for your time, and I have so many questions, but I'm trying to just kind of be conscious of lunch as well. My main question is, both two of you, or maybe more than two of you, are parents, and you mentioned that, and I find that in a world where, as a photographer, I'm often improvising and working with clients to give them what they want. I've been, privileged enough to work with Booth and even Meta as well. I feel like, is there any kind of fears about, you know, us being almost too smart for our own good, and specifically with like having kids, right? Like I'm sure we all remember, not lying per se, but strategically communicating to our parents. And there's a certain point where maybe like as a dad or as a mom, you're like, okay, well, you know, there's just like a cutoff or there's like a kind of bottom line, right? So that question or that kind of prompt paired with a personal experience. So I just got back from Kenya last week. I went over to do a photo shoot. Long story short, it was the craziest experience of my life because one of the clients was in the middle of like a whole smear campaign like online because they were accused of scamming different African creatives and all this stuff. And it was insane because I was like, dang, like, do I take these pictures? Do I go back to America? Like, what should I do? And I found that in her own explanation of like what happened and basically like lack of planning, she didn't find that space to empathize with the people who were essentially left off of the job. She kind of just like, it wasn't over communication, but I kind of called BS. And I just found that there was a point where she could have just been like, hey, like we effed up, right? And just been accountable, been like, let's not put this statement out. Let's not, you know, be insensitive. And so, yeah, the question is sort of two-part there with that context of my experience. And then I was inspired by your parent kind of mentioned to kind of give just the human perspective, but also in work, high-profile clients. You guys have lots of things to do. I just wonder if there's ever a time where you're like, man, like, are we like over problem solving, or are we pushing it too far without just kind of cutting things off?
Thank you for that. I want to just do one, because I want to get one more question, but for another parent on the podium here, how are you thinking about your kids using AI? Is that cheating? Are they lying? Is it strategic communicating, as we heard? Jimmy, or?
Well, I 3 years ago in Cannes, I said to the creative community that I was nervous about AI taking the job. I said, don't be nervous about AI or fear about AI, fear a creative using AI. And I said to my kids, go all in. Go all in, and go all in on compassion, empathy, and the soft skills that will be able to be super important. So that's pretty much what I recommend my kids to do. And understand, like, for example, in his case, that is the most constantly curious about it, is about, okay, what the world will change based on the technology. What will happen when the disparity between the people who have the technology and the people who doesn't have the technology? What can you do to actually democratize that technology? That's the questions. As an international affairs student, that's how you need to ask. Those are the questions.
Thank you for that. We have time for one more question, and then we're going to do a little speed round. Go ahead.
My name is Christelle. I'm from Lebanon. And I just wanted to build on something that Craig and Jimmy said earlier. So out of a personal experience, 10 years ago, I lost my dad to a sudden cardiac arrest. So I've been like always very, very active on Instagram. So I decided to like use my platform to raise awareness and become an advocate for cardiac disease. So for the past 10 years, I've always been creating posts, and like I made collaborations with local NGOs and regional NGOs to help underprivileged people actually get access to medical examinations when it came to like anything related to cardiac disease. And now with AI, I always thought that, okay, it's now going to be like easier for me to be creating posts and getting engagement on like the awareness campaigns that I'm doing. But it was like totally the opposite. Whenever I used to like just create any post purely with AI, it never gained any engagement, and it never like even got any like positive outcome of people like actually calling the NGOs and taking like appointments to get their tests. Whenever I added even one small tiny element of my personal story, like the post would just go viral.
Yeah.
So like I think even with AI, without like this personal human touch, I don't think like it's ever gonna be like, it's never gonna be the same with just AI. Even like if these are like stories generated by AI, like the human touch of someone, like an actual human going on Instagram, like, or any social media platform, live, talking, sharing, even like just a tiny bit of their story, I think would always make all the difference.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful observation, and I'm sorry that it came from such tragedy for you. Thank you for sharing that. We're about to wrap, but before we do, I have my little speed round question, which is thinking of your career and your work as strategic and creative leaders, what's a piece of content or an experience or a method that you would share with our audience today that's worth adopting? We'll just go straight down, and thank you, Jimmy, for going first.
Thank you. I will say, remember, we humans are an organism. And biomimicry, understanding nature and learning from nature is critical to understand, especially the algorithm. We are hardwired humans to humanity, and the algorithm agrees with that. That's why is that happening. So what I would recommend to you is to see a documentary in Netflix called Beautiful Fungi, and understand the mycelium network, because that's exactly who we are.
Thank you. Terry?
So I love learning about other people's creative process, you know, whether it's like doing an episode of Saturday Night Live, or there's a great documentary about the South Park guys. It's called 6 Days to Air. And the thing that I love about it is that it's a torturous process. They're tortured by coming up with the idea, they're tortured by writing the episode, then they're tortured by making it. And I find it very comforting, because creativity, doing great creativity, is really hard, even for the guys who do it really, really well.
Awesome.
And so don't feel discouraged when it gets hard.
Yeah,
It's hard for everybody.
Wow, thank you for that. Craig?
I absolutely agree with that. One of my favorite things to cite is a book called 10 Things I Learned in Architecture School. I find it an incredibly helpful guide to marketing, because it talks about what you're designing for, how someone actually experiences something to think about, and even the way you draw lines to convey a solid base and strength. And so my team is always sick of me recommending this book, but I recommend it highly as a way to think about communication marketing.
Fabulous, thank you. AG, bring us home.
Sure. So there's a woman I've been following for 8 or 9 years named Martha Beck, and she's an academic and also a spiritual leader, and she has turned it into coaching for some high-profile people as well. And she talks a lot about how curiosity and creativity are the opposite of anxiety. And she has a lot of research, and she's basically kind of proven that, like, your brain cannot hold anxiety and curiosity at the same time because it's a different operating system. So she really talks about leaning into curiosity and leaning into creativity as a relief for anxiety. And I think whether it's like personal struggles or a larger macro climate that might be creating stress, the idea that we get to have jobs and careers that allow us to lean into curiosity and creativity and maybe move us out of that anxiety a little bit, for me, is really inspiring, because I think at the heart of strategy and ideas is really just new solutions and new ways forward. And who doesn't need that right now? She has a beautiful quote that is, ordinary humans in their pain and suffering are destroying the world, and awakened human beings and peace and creativity can save it. So on the bad days, I think of that one. But yeah, super inspiring.
Thank you so much. What a privilege and an honor to learn from and with the four of you. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Craig. And thank you, AG. And thank you to the Columbia SPS community.